Don't skip this. This is your confirmation. This message didn't find you by accident, chosen one. You were led here because God has watched you carry the weight in silence. The heartbreak, the confusion, the why me, the do they even know what they did. You've been misunderstood, ignored, overlooked, and even invisible to the people you love the most. But you were never forgotten. You were set apart. There's a difference. You were being positioned because what's in you has never been seen before in your bloodline. You are the trailblazer, the curse breaker, the first of your kind. And that kind of calling comes with isolation. Not to destroy you, but to prepare you. Let's examine why your journey felt so isolating and what being the first of your kind actually means. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe before we get started. For this is more than just content. For the first of their kind, it is a divine confirmation. Enter 77 in the comments section immediately if this message speaks to your spirit. That figure isn't arbitrary. It's a sign to heaven and earth that you understand who you are, separated, called out, and selected to defy expectations. This message won't be read by everyone. Only those who truly were destined to take the lead in something that has never been done before. You'll also understand why your life felt so alienated, so different, and so misinterpreted if you stick with it through to the end. You can't just watch this once and be done with it. This is a spiritual roadmap for trailblazers, a multi-layered truth that gets stronger every time your spirit returns to it. Rewatch it as often as your spirit prompts you to do so, as each time you do so, a new aspect of the calling you've been carrying in silence will become clear. You weren't by yourself. It's time to discover why you were being prepared. Let's get started. Chapter 1. You were divinely different. You knew you were unique from an early age. You didn't belong. There was always something in you that resisted the surface level, something that yearned for more than what the world called normal. Even when you made every effort to shape yourself into what other people expected of you. Even when it would have been simpler to settle, you were unable to do so. Even when you could have gotten applause by pretending, you couldn't fake it. You challenged things that others believed to be true. You picked up on things that others didn't. Your years couldn't adequately describe the feelings and insights you carried. It wasn't pride. It was not rebellion. It wasn't dysfunction. The early awakening within your spirit was a divine purpose. Right? Amen. To feel the peace of the angels and show your support with a super thank you up to $20. Before you had the words to describe it, God had implanted something eternal within you. You were born with the ability to see what others missed, frequencies that others were insensitive to cause your spirit to react. Others sought approval, but you sought comprehension. You were drawn to the quiet because that's where your true voice could be heard, while others followed crowds. You were marked by God from the start. The opinions of others could not remove the seal that heaven placed on your soul. You were not created to fit in. You were forced to face it. You weren't made to fit in. You were dispatched to make a breakthrough. Your surroundings have never been as loud as your calling. Your life never quite fits the mold because of this. Heaven's fingerprint on your identity was your spiritual sensitivity, emotional depth, and unusual hunger for meaning. And the kingdom honored you despite the fact that the world didn't comprehend you. People might have called you odd. They might have accused you of being overly emotional, quiet, spiritual, dramatic, or intense. They were unaware, however, that you weren't broken. You were ahead of schedule. You had blueprints for things that had not yet been constructed. The language you were using was one that had not yet been taught. You were moving with a grace that had not yet been acknowledged. You anticipated the future, and it wasn't your fault that the trip was uncomfortable. You had proof. Echoing is not your natural talent. You were made to create. History was not intended for you to repeat. To rewrite it, you were born. The script was not intended for you. You were selected to change the whole scene. Additionally, rejection frequently precedes recognition for individuals like you. You are a spiritual innovator, a system disruptor, and a pattern breaker. And while there may not always be immediate recognition for that type of calling, there's always an eternal reward. You were never at a disadvantage because of your differences. It was a divine task for you. Chapter 2. Your insight was brought by isolation. Yes, you did feel isolated. Yes, it was painful in ways that were unabated by quiet. On some evenings, the silence was oppressive. You began to doubt your value when it felt like the world was progressing while you were hidden. Conversations were replayed. You questioned whether you're lacking something too quiet, too sensitive, too spiritual, or too intense. However, you were not at fault for what was occurring. It was the formation you had selected. It was never by accident that you were isolated. It was the plan of heaven. You weren't being left out. It was a private promotion for you. You weren't left behind. Something sacred was the reason you were being separated. Right? Amen. To feel the peace of the angels and show your support with a super thank you up to $20. In order to speak to you without being interrupted, God had to draw you away from the commotion. In order for you to finally recognize his voice among the many, he had to eliminate all other distractions. People didn't know they were creating space for something bigger, the presence of the one who never leaves. When they left, God became your constant source of comfort when no one else was there to affirm you. He increased the volume of his voice inside when the external encouragement ceased. And your compass was that voice. That voice served as your cornerstone. Your discernment not only grew but matured in the loneliness. Your sensitivity sharpened, not just increased. You became aware of what other people were missing. You became aware of what others were ignoring. Even before words were spoken, your spirit sensed atmospheres. You were being taught how to see while everyone else was busy trying to get noticed. You were being taught how to read silence and how to have faith when the natural world didn't cooperate. In a place that was empty, you discovered how to pray. When you had no other confirmation than God's whisper, you learned how to hear from him. Silence gave you strength, obscurity gave you insight, and your personal surrender gave you power. Isolation served as your practice area. Your identity was honed there without any performance. Because of what you went through in the wilderness, rather than what you heard from others, your relationship with God became more intimate. People weren't just keeping you away. They were entrusting something they couldn't carry to you. You were being molded into a person whose voice would one day arouse spirits and change rooms. You gained a spiritual advantage from this seclusion, a wisdom that comes from brokenness rather than books, a depth that comes from real interactions rather than praise, a peace grounded in revelation rather than circumstances. You weren't simply concealed. Only heaven could see where you were being developed, and the results of that development will soon be apparent. You'll soon understand what you've learned in private. When it does, people will question how you were able to acquire such strength, clarity, and spiritual weight. However, they will never comprehend that it originated from a place where few people would have survived, that it was constructed during silent seasons, long nights, and silent prayers. You were chosen to hear what other people are missing. To see what others avoid, you were dragged away. That realization will now serve as your roadmap for the next stage of your career. Isolation was not a form of discipline. Preservation was the reason. It was getting ready. The silence is now ready to speak. Chapter 3. Dismantling what others have obligated you to. You weren't just picked to live because you're the first of your kind. You were tasked with facing, uprooting, and breaking cycles that were inherited like heirlooms in your family. Addiction, emotional avoidance, financial constraints, fear-based thinking, covert abuse, and silence where truth ought to have been spoken. The situation was not merely bad luck. They were altars, bondages, and spiritual strongholds that may have been accepted, tolerated, or contested by generations before you. However, God designated you to destroy them. Your life has never been easy because of this. You have always fought for your peace because of this. You never felt completely safe in places where other people appear to be at ease because of this. Because you were never supposed to be comfortable. Right? Amen. To feel the peace of the angels and show your support with a super thank you up to $20. Breakers stand out from the crowd. Where there is still fighting, warriors do not rest. You were forced into war from birth, not by choice. And in reality, what seemed like needless conflict was spiritual conflict. You weren't merely getting by. You were up against generations of concessions. Right now, you weren't being attacked because of who you are. You were attacked for the purpose for which you were created. Resources are never wasted by the enemy on a non-threatened individual. Your current situation wasn't the focus of the battle for your life. It had to do with your future. It had to do with the future of your kids. It was about the new legacy of your bloodline. Long before you did, hell saw your potential. The attacks arrived early because of this. You were sent to close the door on cycles that enslaved your ancestry, which is why the pressure felt constant. Additionally, spiritual resistance is always sparked when spiritual doors are closed. Here's the potent truth, though. You didn't fold. You persisted. Others would have been crushed by the seasons you went through. Even though you were in excruciating pain, you continued to walk. You screamed to God in bewilderment and fatigue, but you never completely cut off your relationship with Him. Your spirit was still reaching even when you were quiet. Most people don't see that kind of strength. Heaven, however, rejoices. It's not arrogance. You were marked to break curses, to bring clarity where confusion existed, to enter unfamiliar places and declare, "This ends with me." It's consciousness. You were sent to illuminate spaces that had become accustomed to being dark. No one paved the roads you were meant to walk. When generations were taught to remain silent, you were selected to speak. There is no comfort in that calling. Confrontation is a part of it. However, God prepared you for the opposition as well as the pressure. Maybe you didn't have a map. The Spirit of God was guiding you even though you didn't have a model to follow. You didn't go crazy because of it. You didn't remain mired in cycles of resentment or guilt because of this. You kept getting back up after every setback, betrayal, and conflict because of this. You are more than a mere survivor. Your very existence is an interruption to hell's plan. You are a breaker, a holy disruptor, a conduit through which heaven declared, "It stops here." Your life will never be typical because of this. You were created to allay people's fears. What others bowed to, you were selected to destroy. God is going to raise you up as evidence that cycles can be broken because you persevered through the fire. Generational chains can and will be broken, and legacies can be rewritten. Chapter 4. Since they had never seen anything like you, they were unable to see you. You desired assistance. You prayed for comprehension. You wished someone could identify you without requiring an explanation. Someone who was able to look past appearances and see what was going on inside. The affirmation that you were waiting for, "I see you. I get it. I've been there too," never materialized. You were valuable because you were unique, not because you weren't. In a place where familiarity was the norm, you were carrying something new. You weren't invisible. You were unheard of because they lacked the eyes and experience to recognize your type of calling. Those around you were unable to see you clearly. You were more than a voice. In a generation that had become accustomed to copying, you were the first wave of a new move, a divine disruption. And you're frequently misinterpreted, misread, or misunderstood when you're carrying something from heaven in an earthly setting. They had no frame of reference for what you were becoming, so they were unable to see you. In a place that was accustomed to the old, you were sent to do something different. You arrived with plans for something they had never thought of. And because people tend to be afraid of things they don't understand, many people feared it rather than welcomed it. They also reject things that are beyond their control. You weren't a fake person because of that rejection. It implied that your presence showed where others had ceased to develop. Their molds were never intended for you. You weren't made to imitate or uphold. You were destined to manifest. You weren't a copy. You were the blueprint. Not the echo, but the sign. Heaven designed for you to initiate, not copy. And as a result, you needed to be alone on your journey. Your seasons of silence are becoming necessary. You weren't forgotten. You were concealed. Not obscure as in forgotten, but obscure as in safe. Like a seed, hidden. Like pressed oil, hidden. Tucked away like a treasure awaiting the right moment. Your surroundings were too small, not that you were too much. You were ahead of schedule, not that you were off. Early to a divine movement that others had not yet recognized. Early to a purity that others were not yet prepared to seek. You were early to a sound, a calling, and a rhythm that was unique to your soul and could not be replicated. Thus, it was indeed lonely. However, intimacy with God was made possible by the loneliness. And it was in that intimacy that you developed your identity. You carried something for which they had no words, so they were unable to affirm you. And because what God was doing in you was never intended to be validated too soon, He didn't let them see it. They would have attempted to rename, reshape, or reduce it if they had discovered it too soon. What God was creating in you, however, required space to develop unhindered. And now, the thing that made you feel uncomfortable is going to replace it. Heaven is going to emphasize the very uniqueness that they failed to notice. Soon, what was previously concealed will be indisputable. Additionally, what you carry will speak for itself when the time comes, so you won't need to explain yourself. You were destined to be noticed. To wake up what has been sleeping, you were summoned. You were made to stand out, not to be confusing, but to guide others toward the future. Chapter 5. A solid foundation is necessary for the weight you carry. What you're carrying isn't your typical one, chosen one. It is revered. It is a generational issue. It weighs a lot. There is more to this calling on your life than fame or fortune. Setting a new standard and making an impact on people you might never meet are the goals. Legacy, healing, deliverance, and generational breakthrough are all carried on the mantle you wear. It has been heavy because of this. Your life has never progressed as you had hoped because of this. You were kept in a slower process while others seemed to soar quickly. It was because your foundation needed to be deeper, not because you were falling behind. God wouldn't permit you to cut corners. He wouldn't allow you to avoid the pressure that developed your spiritual muscles or character-building opportunities. Because you need to have unwavering roots when you're carrying this much weight. A vessel that can endure pressure is necessary for the kind of glory that is about to descend upon your life. Remain modest when you succeed and maintain your integrity in public. Although the process seemed drawn out, it was never in vain. All of the delays were intentional. Every door that was shut was a shield. Another layer of spiritual infrastructure was being laid down with each traumatic detour. The suffering you went through, the silent tears you shed, the evenings you felt abandoned. They weren't squandered. They were holy exchanges between heaven and you. You were being prepared for the future. You gained wisdom from every lesson. Every heartbreak helped you to love more deeply by removing your pride. Every setback sharpened your judgment. And even though it appeared as though nothing was going on outside, God was preparing you to carry something that others would have dropped by laying cement beneath your feet. Because it won't be a passing feeling when you rise. It won't become popular. The success won't be fleeting and fade with applause. It will be a spiritually grounded elevation of God. It will be something that endures beyond you and leaves an impression. There's more to this upcoming season than just getting noticed. It's about what you've become and what others will gain from it. Loudness wasn't your calling. The purpose of your calling was to endure. It wasn't your purpose to pursue platforms. You were summoned to change the moods. The process has been so intense because of this. The weight has felt so personal because of this. God knew He could put this kind of responsibility in your hands. He was aware that you would learn how to wait longer, pray more deeply, and obey even when it didn't make sense, while others would crumble under pressure. Holy things are never hurried, and you have been entrusted with something sacred. History makers need to be grounded, and you were called to make history. Before you could trust your influence, you had to test your foundation. The world will see the fruit when you rise, but they won't comprehend the cost. You were designed to bear the burden of a movement, not a single instance. Everything you went through demonstrated that you were worthy of the investment heaven made in you, and you were ready to maintain revival rather than just spark excitement. You were being anchored, not delayed. Chapter 6. The people who disapproved of you will now see you thrive. Because of the way you were treated, there were times when you doubted everything: your voice, your worth, and your purpose. They called you strange, even though you arrived with good intentions. You